Yeah, because I mean, I came from a book club.
Oh, yeah. Do you want to do book club or coaching? I guess either we can do both, I guess.
It's up to you.
Yeah.
We can do both because it take long.
Yeah, let's do both. Let's we can just start with your video and then we'll jump into book club as we go. Oops. So there we go. So all right, why don't you let me know, you know, kind of the same as we always do, just in even though I've got Patreon up, let me know what you've got going on in this case and what your questions are.
Yeah, so what we've been working on is getting Thorn to work at a further distance from handler.
Okay.
So what's come up from this our recent meetings with the advisory groups is that they are seeing that while we've been doing some quite good what's the word I'm looking for, searching in intensively in areas, they're thinking that because we've only got limited dogs, limited resource, they'd like to see us work at a wider range. So rather than find every scat,
Okay.
can we find just a scat? You know, just have the dogs working at a much wider range and just be picking up scats away out in distance. So although that's going to be difficult, and various parts of that I don't think work with the current dogs and team, but what I've decided to do is this month I was kind of working on, Thorn normally works about 20 meters from me as a natural distance. That's his natural run out search distance. And that's a good distance for me because I can respond to a find in a reasonable amount of time to not build frustration if I'm taking 10 minutes to get there. So I'm there, you know, pretty quickly, reward, move on, kind of style, rather than a dog having to sit there waiting on me, climbing a hill or doing something. So just as part of that, I decided to work on his distance just by using the ball launcher and throwing the ball out and have him find that distance.
Oh, nice.
And just extend his range and have him working out, be comfortable working at distance because he kind of likes being a bit closer. So just to see if he'll go and search out there and sustain that search out at a distance in order to find that ball and then return. The other part of it is because of grass seed problems last year and several vet visits, we've invested in a pair of rec specs this year. So again, we've just been training them with this ball work in the grassy field and get them to wear the rec specs and be quite happy and comfortable with them. Nice. So it's a pretty short video. I've got other ones that are really long, but because I thought there'd be lots of people here, we just uploaded one of the quicker ones just to see his distance and show that he's going out there and searching and covering ground himself in order to find the ball in a headwind at the minute. Okay. Yeah. It seems to be going well. We've just been doing it really in weekends for his downtime. And so this working week, we'll see if he's been doing it all weekend this weekend. We'll see if he's increased his range any by going back to work tomorrow and seeing if he runs out further in order to find scat. Yeah, it's interesting that they would want to increase the dog's distance working away from you instead of just like increasing transect spacing or something like that. Yeah, because that's what I said. We had obviously our transects at about 23 meters normally, but because they had some experience of gun dogs for flushing birds, and they said they're working about 200 meters away from them. Why can't our dogs work 200 meters away? And so because it's the time scale that I can't see what he's doing if he's getting the final response. And then he's going to build frustration because he's been sitting there looking at a scat saying, it's here, it's here, it's here, it's here. Yeah. And I'm going to take a long time to get there. Yeah. And he does have that still a bit of frustration. If I don't get there quick enough, he starts nosing it and smushing it. Just that's how it rec specs.
It's a cool solution. I like the idea.
Unfortunately, can't see the ball where it goes, but
Yeah, but I've used these chuckets and they'll go.
yeah,
This is like, yeah, I like the solution here. Did you come up with this as a
yeah,
practice
yeah.
drill? I haven't, yeah, I like this idea a lot.
And so he's hunting there and not really looking back to me for guidance.
Uh-huh.
Because he is a little bit, if he's out searching, he usually has to look back to see if I'm moving or pointing somewhere. But in this case, he decided to keep searching. Unfortunately, he goes out just outside and finds a ball.
Good
So the wind's
boy.
coming head onto him there, so it wouldn't go there.
Good boy.
Nice job. Gosh, he's a muscular dog.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm trying to think if there's anything like how else we could make this into something. I like this as like that, yeah, that first step of like building the drill of like, okay, you can go and you can search further away.
Yeah.
No, I'm kind of trying to think through. Yeah, what would our next steps be in order to kind of encourage maintaining that behavior when he doesn't see the ball thrown? Maybe that would be the first next step.
Yeah. So place the ball out of sight, do it blind for him.
Yeah. And then adding your
That's-
movement and kind of rewarding the ranging that way.
Yeah. So there was one, as I say, it was about 4 minutes long, where he did go off track and he was searching the wrong area. And I had to walk in. But when I started walking in a direction, he then came in and searched that direction. Don't know if I can.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm trying to think. The other thing that kind of comes to mind for me that could be another potential thing to play around with this would actually be using something like flagging as a visual cue to get him to search further away, and having that, because and then we can always fade out that visual cue. But if we kind of taught him that it is at flagging and use that as a way to get him comfortable working further away, and then we kind of fade out the flags.
Yeah.
That would be another thing that I would consider trying. I feel like this is talked about a lot in like the competition obedience world, is that it's so much easier to use these like physical prompts.
Yes. Yes.
And then fade those out.
And so we're doing that in the indoor
our body language and fade, because changing our body language is so much harder for us.
Yes.
Okay, you were going to say?
Yeah. So I was doing that indoors with the object searches to get up to about the 50-meter mark, where it's an empty shed and then the objects are right at the far end, and go and search them. So this is transferring that to outside. I think, as you say, to have something that he can physically know is going to an area, search and come back, and then yeah. So because even I've got little cones that would probably do the job as well.
Yeah. Well, and especially,
it doesn't have to be grass.
Well, now I was almost thinking like, I like the idea of, are they the little cones that are like this, kind of this shape and this tall?
Yeah, like these little ones.
Oh, okay. So a little bit bigger than what I was thinking.
Little traffic cones.
But you could make them more visible and then less visible by making them smaller and smaller, or making them shorter and shorter, so that he's kind of, that visual cue is getting faded out, but he still is kind of learning to go out that way. Or you could do the same thing with like pin flags. Just take pin flags and use some like tin snips to make them shorter and shorter and shorter.
Yeah, so we can have them on a pole and just slide them down the pole as they until they're just not visible anymore in the long grass, and then it's
yeah, I'd be curious to see this week how the chuck it stuff is going, and then if that is doing the trick, but not enough, or hasn't really changed much. I'd be curious to try more of like, yeah, the directed using a visual prompt. See how that goes. And now I'm thinking, gosh, it'd be kind of fun to get a chuck. I haven't used a Chuck It since I grew up with a lab. And Barley has always struggled with marking the Chuck It. It's too, he's so used to the physics of how a human arm throws a ball that it just totally throws him off. And we almost always, like every time I borrowed a Chuck It, it's ended up just being really frustrating for both of us. But I like this exercise, and I'm kind of like, yeah, I mean, it might be kind of frustrating for him, but this doesn't sound like, it sounds kind of fun to try. And where I'm going to be staying this summer, starting in about a week, I'm at the same place that I was last summer. So I'm going to be on an 80-acre farm in Nebraska. So I've got plenty of space to go huck tennis balls around and play with this. And again, we're in the opposite. We're searching 100-meter by 100-meter plots. So I actually don't want him ranging very far away from me, because I'm supposed to be walking transect 20 meters, transect 20 meters, transect. So if he's more than 10 meters away from me, he's ruining the the search. Which doesn't.
That's the thing, and that's how we were working when we're covering land to try and, if we're looking for stoats. But as I say, it's just this idea that if they're going to want them ranging further.
No, I mean, it's still a cool project, even if maybe, again, it seems to me that changing search strategy would be easier than changing the dog's search strategy. But, maybe for scientific reasons, whatever, who knows?
Yeah, it's just an idea that they're throwing up at the minute. So,
and it's so fun.
And I would like them to work with, have confidence to go a bit further on some occasions. But I mean, when you're working cliffs and things as well, though, it's he has to be closer in. So it's just having that balance. Do
you work him in a bell or a GPS collar or anything that would help as he's getting further and further away?
No.
Okay. I found bells help quite a bit. And then when I was doing the grizzly bear work, we had the dogs working in GPS collars so that we could actually see where they were. And that was partially because, gosh, even if they were 20 meters away, sometimes we couldn't see or hear them anymore.
Yeah. And we were never that far. That's the thing. Because a lot of it's farmland.
Yeah, so it's pretty open, decent line of sight.
Huge. We don't have forests. There's no trees in Orkney, so it's pretty open. It's just on heather country. I like having the recall as well, that because it's for protected species, we're working on licenses for protected species where we don't really want them running out of that distance if I can't immediately stop them if something gets off a nest or something starts alerting. So
yeah.
It's good fun.
Yeah, just this morning, I've been so proud. I called Niffler off 3 snowshoe hares in the last 2 weeks, and then this morning I wasn't really paying attention, and he was probably 100 meters away from me and got a group of 4 deer, and I was able to call him off. But I was so proud of he's been able to not chase all this wildlife for the last couple months, and then you get them far enough away from you and you're not right on it, and even these really well dogs, you still have slip-ups. Okay,
you do, and that's what we're going to be very careful.
Gosh, sorry. Well, if that's I am not. I'm not. This is not Kayla at her finest, believe it or not. What'd you think of the book? I've been really enjoying it.
Yeah, it's quite heavy going. I have to read a lot of things twice.
It feels a lot like a college textbook. I'm just really unclear what college class would ever be this specific. I'm like, I want to teach this class. But what is one of the things that, particularly that second chapter, the skill and expertise chapter with the cognitive approach.
Yes.
Yeah, what is kind of, do you have any background in like cognitive psychology, or are you familiar with any of this?
None.
Yeah.
So
That's
it's
got to
really
be
interesting.
a slog.
Yeah, it's pretty hard going, but there's a lot of stuff in it that I'm just looking at, and it's just like getting the mind ticking and thinking that's actually quite true. A couple of bits that I'm just trying to think that are highlighted in it. It's amazing they gave the book away for free as a PDF.
Yeah, I like read the legal page of that website, and I do not understand how it's legal, but I assume that they're the ones who get in trouble and not us. So
yeah, it's like, wow, how can you just, surely it's quite an expensive book to make.
yeah,
The first,
we can go through the first chapter first.
Where's my highlights? It's a bit I hadn't really thought of as terming them as dogs as being like humans in the work.
Yeah.
Kind of factor that it goes through and describes. I'd always been taught, don't anthropomorphize.
Yeah.
It's a dog and it doesn't think of a human. It doesn't, it doesn't reason. It doesn't plan. It just does. And that kind of throws it in his head saying, well, that's what they do.
Yeah, I loved one of my favorite quotes so far from the book was that anthropomorphism is indispensable with working dogs because they are, by definition, anthropomorphic. I was like, whoa, yeah. That one, it's funny. So Franz de Waal, are you familiar with him?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I've read almost every book he's ever written, and he talks quite a bit about kind of the flip side of anthropomorphism as this concept of anthropodenial. And I've always kind of taken that and agreed to it, and maybe to some degree had understood that that was also especially true for dogs that have been really bred to work with us and be human partners. But I think this chapter like underlined that in a way that I hadn't quite heard really, really well before.
Yeah.
There were a couple things in that first chapter that I flagged as odd. So like the first one that I wrote, is this true? And a bunch of question marks, was that dogs, like humans, are products of uncontrolled evolution. They were not built with a purpose in mind. That doesn't ring true to me, does it?
No.
I would say dogs, more than just about anything else, except for maybe horses, are like the species on this planet that you can most say were built with a purpose in mind.
They were domesticated with a purpose in mind.
Yeah.
But it was a predator, so it had a purpose, surely.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that was the one. I think there was one other phrase in the second chapter that really got my attention, but that one was the first one in the first chapter where I was like, I really don't know if I believe that, or I guess maybe I don't quite know what uncontrolled evolution means. Like maybe that is a pivot phrase that has a highly technical definition that I'm not understanding.
And I had one highlighted: the closest model for a working dog is a working person, and vice versa. Dogs and humans are more closely related than either species is to any existing machine.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, although it's interesting. I don't know enough about machine learning, I guess, to say. I wonder, because this book was in like 2009, right?
Yeah.
So, there have been some pretty big advances in machine learning, but certainly on a biological or evolutionary scale, you can't argue with that.
No.
Yeah, I liked the idea that he kind of put forward of that working dogs often act as surrogate humans by doing jobs that humans can't, like sniffing bobs, or replacing humans for jobs that would be super tedious or unaffordable, like being a guide dog. Like obviously a human could be a guide dog, but if you're paying a fair wage, that would not be affordable.
No, definitely not. And the bit that really struck with me is this ever ending question of how long can a dog work for before it loses focus?
Mm-hmm.
Because we've always had that issue through all parts of dog work that I've done. But it says that they've tested it in people, and there is a point where you stop concentrating naturally. I'm trying to find the part here.
There was some good stuff about attention in that first chapter.
Yeah, I'm just trying to. Because that's a question that everyone wants an answer to.
Well, and I liked one of the things he wrote kind of on this similar topic was that animal behaviorists studying canine workers are aware of potential limitations in the dog's capacity to sustain effort over time. They, however, tend to interpret decrements in performance efficiency as a motivational problem, like boredom, not fundamental limitations of attention resources, which is also really interesting because obviously, like to some degree, drive and finding a really high drive dog who is naturally inclined towards your work can combat boredom. But yeah, that's an interesting point that boredom, if you're asked, and I think most of us would understand at some point you can't say, oh, the dog didn't want to work anymore after 26 hours of work, it was bored. It's like, no, they just physically can't do that. But I wonder some of the limitations that may spring up where most dogs can only work for 2, 3, 4 hours, whatever it is, before they need a break. Saying that dog isn't motivated enough, I think, is always that first line of defense, but maybe that's not always accurate.
No, and I think we all have our limitations in that.
I'm not very good at working more than like 2 hours at a time, unless it's a pretty meaty task that I'm really enjoying, which I guess is kind of a motivational thing, but also, or you're getting reinforcement throughout it. Like I find I'm more able to work for longer if I'm doing something like email can be really reinforcing, because it's like each email takes 5 minutes and is a task and it's done, and then you get your little bit of dopamine. And I wonder what the difference is as far as canine work ability length based on like number of fines, or anecdotally it seems like my dogs work better longer if they're at least making kind of a certain level of fines. And I wonder if it almost might be like that Yerkes-Dodson's curve of arousal, where at some point there's probably too many fines and then the dog's just exhausting themselves. But anyway, you were going to say.
No, that's true. And I mean, you feel it yourself when you're doing searching, that sometimes your mind just starts to wander and you think, well, is the dog at the same level? Then if my mind starts to wander, then is his also just fading in and out, thinking, this is, especially on areas where there is nothing, like our predator free ones, where it's not engaging really for either of us.
That makes sense.
The other bit I picked up, a really interesting figure that you got was the pups from untrained and trained narcotic detection dogs. The bit where they separated them out. And then when the pups reared by the untrained bitches in 3 months, the groups of figure they come up with, the observational group, 85% passed the aptitude test of where the pups could watch the mother work.
Yeah.
And the other ones who weren't exposed to anything, only 19% passed in the other groups.
Yeah.
So again, that's something I mean, we used to, when I was working sheepdogs, yes, your pups came out to work with you and watched other dogs working, and that's kind of where they learned. But I don't think in detector dogs, it's really a thing. I mean, you don't really have the pups running behind the mother, doing detection work and learning the ropes as we used to do with sheepdogs. That's really saying that, yeah, they really learned a lot at that stage.
Yeah.
So maybe we need to turn that in his head.
I wonder, like Niffler has been able to watch Barley work since he was 9 weeks old. So obviously Barley's not his mom. And
just watching another dog, yeah.
Yeah. I wonder how much that may have helped him. I haven't dug up, I had it on my list to dig that study up and read into it a little bit, because one of the things that I did flag as a potential hiccup in their interpretation of that study was that it says that the pups were removed from their moms at 6 weeks old.
Yes.
I wonder, there's quite a bit of research showing that that's just not good for development and not.
No.
So I wonder, maybe if you waited until 12 weeks and gave them the same rearing, aside from whether or not they were allowed to watch, I think that would be a little bit more convincing to me. It's not that I agree and understand and believe that watching mom would probably help. That makes sense to me. Again, especially given your sheepdog example. And we've seen there are studies that have pretty clearly shown some observational learning in dogs. But with this particular study, I really didn't like that. They were like, well, this group we basically orphaned, and then this group got a silver spoon, and lo and behold, the silver spoon group did better. And I haven't gone back in to read and make sure, but based on Helton's description of it, that was what I got out of it.
Yeah, I don't know why they did that. Split from 6 weeks to 3 months.
Yeah, 6 weeks is really young.
That's not even weaned.
No, the youngest I usually see is 7. And that's like some old school working dog breeders will like sheepdog breeders for the most part will like send puppies out at 7 weeks. But in the US and most states, you're actually not allowed to sell puppies till 8 weeks. No,
that's the same here. That's a minimum under welfare rules. There's a lot of reference within the book to studies and other books. So it's a great list of
I've been starting to keep lists of books too, or of things that he's citing. I'm starting to put into the hopper for future science highlights for the podcast, so that'll hopefully get me to go back and read all these papers.
There's a lot in there.
And one of the things, gosh, I would just love to see this done in the working dog world. I increasingly think I'm going to go back and get my PhD, and then I want to just be a professor where I get to do this fun stuff. I would love to see like a cross fostering program done with dogs. Like they do that a lot with rats, but actually seeing like, okay, if you've got a random litter of shelter puppies and you've got a Belgian Malinois working line litter and you swap half the litters, I think like we've always got these nature, nurture, genetics, talent questions. And you can't, as he points out, you can't do sometimes you kind of can, but cross fostering is really difficult to demonstrate in humans. But I think there are probably ways to do it relatively ethically with dogs. The only example with humans is like, are you familiar with the Minnesota twin study?
No.
Oh my gosh, it's so fascinating. It's kind of a retrospective study where they find pairs of twins that have been reared separately and then study them. So a lot of times it's orphans or kids who went into foster care and ended up in separate homes, and looking at how they are similar or different from their adoptive families, from their adoptive siblings, and from their birth siblings. You know, so again, it's kind of like an accidental cross-fostering study. It's fascinating.
Yeah.
And you know, again, it wouldn't be ethical to do on purpose, but there is the Minnesota Twin Project. It's been running for decades now, looking at all these twins separated at birth.
Yeah.
Yeah, gosh.
Part about expertise was interesting as well, as to what defines an expert.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had to read it twice, thinking.
Yeah, especially all the definitions. I was like, okay, yeah, I think if I were taking this as a college course and we had an entire one-day lecture on the different types of expertise, I might have it now, but just reading it a couple times didn't quite do it for me.
No, I'm gonna have to read it again and just, yeah.
And I mean, I always have enjoyed when we get into these conversations of, you know, does the fact that they don't have language so they can't express something actually give us any evidence either way as to whether or not they are capable of thinking it and performing it. And I love seeing someone really putting that in the forefront for working dogs, because I've seen that so often with cognitive science talking about birds or dolphins or chimps or whatever. And I've seen it talked about with dogs, but it's so cool to see it through the lens of working dogs and not just pet dogs.
Yes.
Yeah.
Other bits that came up.
One of the other things that did like it's funny, I've overall so enjoyed this book, but there have been a couple things that have gotten me to question things, was that he gave that example in chapter 2 about the greyhounds, where kind of proportionally racing greyhounds are at peak performance at a similar point to human sprinters.
Yeah.
And I was a little skeptical of that, given he doesn't really talk about physiology or muscle development as a factor there, because I've always kind of assumed that was mostly kind of a physiological thing. That is why human sprinters excel when they're 23 and not when they're 63.
Yes.
Not like a strategy or an expertise thing. So it seemed like a poor example to me, but and then agility dogs seem like they might be a better example. And you tend to see agility dogs, like a lot of the dogs at the World Championships are 7. They're quite a bit older.
Yeah. So
not all of them though. Like now I'm like, I think the last agility World Championships I watched, there was like one dog that was 2 and a couple dogs that were like 10 or 11, but really most of them were in that like 5 to 7 range, because you need, you know, it's that intersection of physique and knowledge.
Yeah, it's more or less. Oh, hang on, my computer's going a bit weird now.
Uh-oh.
That's fine. I've just let's bring that across again. I think I touched a cable there that didn't like it. And I suppose with agility in that it's a learning process.
Yeah.
There's a lot of learning process in agility, which will be the cognitive learning part, whereas greyhound racing is really just, it's the, as you say, the physical speed and running. There's not a lot of learning other than the pre-drive to chase a furry rabbit.
Yeah, at least as far as I know. I mean,
I don't
think there's a lot of strategy to it.
No. No, they're just a chase.
Yeah.
And it's
so maybe not the best example. Like it's an interesting correlation, but I'm not sure if I agree with him on the causation, I guess would be the nerdy way to say it. Yeah, and I loved this idea of this dual task data that he was talking about. Again, he was actually talking about agility here, where the dogs have to kind of learn how to run the obstacles first. And once they're fluent enough at running the obstacles, then they can start being able to respond to their handler's cues and like attend appropriately to the cues the handler is attempting to give. And like, I've run a little bit of agility, and like, I've totally had to, both Barley and I had to work really hard on him not responding to the cue of me running with my arm like this as a cue to take an obstacle. And that's also partially me learning how to not run like that.
Yeah.
But you know, running like a runner and not like an agility handler. And I love that concept. And I'm going to be curious to see if anywhere later in this book there are any examples of people kind of testing this dual, what do you call it, dual task data with detection dogs. I suppose that could be some amount of like discrimination, distraction introduced to a search and kind of seeing how the dogs are able to perform. I'm not quite sure. It's really interesting.
Yeah.
There's so much good stuff in here.
There is, yeah. Just reading bits again that I thought, did I miss that the first time?
One thing, one other thing that did kind of, maybe the last thing that I think got me to raise an eyebrow was that he wrote, Helton did not find any breed differences in agility, precision, or in the amount of training necessary to achieve mastery, which seemed really odd to me in the sport of agility. Because then there must be something else that explains why it's so thoroughly dominated by border collies, and he doesn't really mention that.
Yeah, but then because he's into the breed stereotyping and performance, and section 2 saying it's relatively uninvestigated, and that's true, I suppose. When you go saying it depends where you live, because in the US it's labs, UK it's Springers, Belgium it's Malinois, Germany, etc. And that is quite true. It's our perception of what's the best detector dog possible. I know in New Zealand in airports, they love beagles. Same as the US Department of Agriculture, it was beagles that they breed and train. Until they worked out the very short dogs. And so the concept of people wearing more backpacks now meant that labs are now more suited, because a beagle can't reach. Backpack used to have everyone backpacks off.
Everyone had the roller bags.
And you used to tell everyone to take their backpacks off so the beagle could sniff it. And then because you have so many people in a backpack now, just traveling with backpacks, then beagles are too short. But it's the same as.
That's a cool example.
Yeah.
I loved, because I think I've read this before. Maybe I've read the same study he's kind of referencing, but the discussion of selecting for physical shape, which can influence perceptual systems and then influence what appears to be cognitive, and the long-nosed dogs and things, the visual kind of concept. I'm pretty sure I've read, I've read like Pop Science reviews of that article, and it's super interesting, and just the sort of thing that I hadn't thought of.
And it's this nationalism, picking your national breed.
That too.
That's going to be the best dog, because as we know that mixed breeds make great detector dogs.
But I would be curious, knowing some people who have handled a lot of different breeds, and potentially people who have handled a lot of maybe 3 different breeds. 5 labs, 5 Belgians, 5 Springers. I'd be really curious to hear, because maybe they all can be similarly successful, but they still, it seems to me, pretty inherently clear that they do work differently.
They do.
Yeah. So Yeah, there's an interesting, like, I think sometimes in the literature, it seems like there's maybe a bit of pushback on, like, it might be appropriate pushback on kind of perceptions of breeds as like the final or major determining factor in a dog's temperament. But sometimes I think when I'm reading it, then I feel like they go a little bit too far, where they're like, breed doesn't predict any intelligence or doesn't predict any behavior. And it's like, well, that just doesn't seem like it can possibly be true, because again, otherwise we wouldn't, like, you're never going to see a greyhound working as a sheepdog.
No.
And I don't,
No.
that is not
It's
just based on raising and training and breed perception. It's just not.
No. No, they don't have the sustained energy as well.
Yeah. There's probably physical components.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. But yeah, is there anything in kind of that more of the cognitive definitions of expertise, kind of going a little earlier into that chapter that we wanted to dig into?
I read it a few days back. It's coming back to me.
Yeah, I read it yesterday, so that helped.
You have to fresh in your mind, yeah.
Yeah, well, yeah, it was funny. I felt really guilty about putting it off to the last minute. Maybe it actually is kind of the way to go, is read it the day before.
That's the way to go, because I've
started, just because it's actually kind of nice having it as a PDF, because here, I'm going to share my screen for a second. What I've been doing is I've been reading it like this, and then I've got notes here, and I'm able to just copy and paste chapter, or like bits that I find really interesting, and then kind of include my own notes. And it's been I'm not usually an e-reader person. I really prefer physical books, but it has been nice to be able to copy and paste like directly into a notes page that is on the same
yeah, I'll have to do that rather than just highlight. I need to make notes. But yeah, as I said, the reading list for after work is pretty huge. I don't know if I'll ever get through it.
Yeah, I feel like we could probably basically base the entirety of Patreon for the next 10 years on just going down all the potential rabbit holes from this one book.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, as I say, not coming from a scientific background, it's takes a bit of chewing through for me.
Yeah, I think I've talked about this previously, but I was just so lucky that, like, I started falling in love with psychology halfway through undergrad, and I took a class called Language and Thought that is all about whether or not thinking something and verbalizing something are the same thing, which is a huge portion of this chapter. I took cognition. I took cognitive neuroethology, that is all about comparative, neuroscience and behavior between basically each week of the class. We went through kind of a different taxonomic group. So we went through like toothed whales, we went through cephalopods, dogs, birds, corvids and parrots. We did them separately. So yeah, it's so interesting. Or not, I don't know. I'm just glad I've taken those classes, because this book has got to be done.
Definitely, yeah. I used to pay more attention at school.
Yeah, well, one, I mean, also, like, I can't quite remember. I think one of the classes just leapt out of the syllabus to me as interesting, and then after I took the first one, I like reworked my schedule for the next my last 3 semesters of school. I was like, this is fascinating. But like, I was a biology major. I was totally just slated to take like mammalogy, animal behavior, blah blah. Well, actually, we didn't have an animal behavior class, and then I kind of accidentally ended up in the psychology department, and was just blown away how useful it is and how much research there is on a lot of these questions that biologists are just kind of like barely starting to come around to.
Yeah. Well, we've got a bit more reading to do then.
Yeah. Well,
coming week.
Yeah. Is there anything?
But I should leave it now. I'll read it the weekend as it's on.
Weekend before, yeah.
Yeah, and keep it fresh in the mind.
And I'll go ahead and I'm gonna publish my notes as kind of a primer refresher, and also hopefully we'll be able to get some other folks to hop on for the future calls. And
yeah, I'm surprised because it was quite a popular choice to
yeah, I mean it's gosh, scheduling on Patreon is the worst part of trying to figure this platform out. Because it's like I feel like I'm offering so much stuff, but there's also, you know, because it's just that extra 3 steps. If I try to have people input on scheduling, I'm just kind of calling out times. And, you know, this didn't actually happen, but I could easily accidentally schedule something on like Canada Day and then lose out on all of the Canadians just because I'm not thinking about it. And, you know, Sundays in July, probably a lot of people are out doing fun stuff.
Yeah, this is fun.
Yeah, I think this is fun.
Surely Sundays are for learning.
Yeah. Well, cool.
Yeah, so we'll be back to work.
Yeah, let me know how the flagging experiment goes, and I might have to go pick up a chuck it today.
Go and chuck it. I also thought Frecky. Frecky's a great dog name at the start of this book.
Yeah.
So the wolf names.
Yeah.
Oh, Frecky. I'd like a dog called Frecky.
Yeah. I've got a whole list on my phone of potential dog names. And now as I'm getting closer and closer to thinking about breeding dogs, I've also got a list of litter themes. So we can have all 8 puppies named like, I don't know. My favorite one currently is Northern Conifer Trees. You know, it's fun. It's fun to daydream about all that.
6 weeks.
Yeah. Yeah. And then we'll do our cross fostering study.
Yeah.
There we go.
Very good.
All right, Grant. Well,
we'll go and hope you feel better.
Yeah,
hope it's not COVID. Did you get 2 lines?
Looks like I'm solidly negative. So
there you go.
Just something else. All right. Well, we'll talk to you in I guess I'll talk to you in about a week, right?
Yeah.
Cool.
Yes. That's sorted for Sunday.
Yeah.
Cheers.
Right.
Thanks.
Yeah. Bye.
Bye.